The first time Daniel accused me of cheating, he didn't yell, he didn't slam his hand on the table, and he didn't create a scene. He was calm, disturbingly calm, and that was what made it terrifying. We were sitting at a rooftop bar downtown, the kind of place we used to joke about affording when we were real adults. The city lights glowing behind him, everything appearing normal, except it wasn't. Daniel said he knew about him, like he was stating a fact he had already verified. I blinked, confused at first, thinking I had misheard and asked who he meant. He leaned back slightly, watching me with a measured expression, as if he had rehearsed this conversation already and told me I didn't have to pretend. Then he slid his phone across the table. On the screen was a picture of me outside my office building a few nights earlier. I was laughing, a guy from my team, Mark, standing beside me, his hand lightly resting on my back. From that angle, it looked intimate, but it wasn't. It had been a late client dinner. We were tired, waiting for an Uber. I explained carefully that it was Mark. He was on my team, and we had just finished a client meeting. Daniel asked about the time. 11:47 p.m. Not aggressively, just pointed, and I said it ran late. He asked about the ride we took together afterward. And that's when I realized this wasn't random. He knew details, specific ones. The Uber, the time, the location. He had been paying attention longer than I thought. I said we split an Uber. The 2 other colleagues were supposed to join but canceled last minute. He noted that I hadn't mentioned that, and I told him it was nothing. He let out a short, humorless laugh and said he wasn't stupid. That sentence changed everything, not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. He wasn't asking. He wasn't confused. He had already built a narrative, and I was just there to confirm it. I asked him if he really thought I'd cheat on him, and he replied that he thought people change. We had been together almost 3 years. We had talked about moving in together, looked at apartments, discussed timelines, engagement, building something stable, and suddenly he was speaking to me like I was unpredictable, like I was someone he didn't recognize. I asked why he hadn't just asked me, and he said he was asking me. I told him quietly that he was accusing me. He didn't deny it, and that silence was louder than anything else that night. As he continued listing moments, a coffee meeting, a late night at the office, a canceled dinner plan, it hit me that this wasn't about one photo. This had been building in his head for weeks. He had been collecting evidence, watching, interpreting, connecting dots without ever once asking me to explain. Then he said something that revealed more about him than me. If I wanted him, just say it. There was no pain in his voice, no fear, just pride, as if he would rather believe I had replaced him than admit he felt insecure. That's when something inside me went quiet, because I realized I wasn't fighting confusion. I was fighting his ego. I said he hadn't even asked if I was happy, and he frowned, asking what that had to do with this. I told him it had everything to do with this, but he didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to. He finally said he couldn't be with someone he didn't trust. That word, trust, landed between us in a way that felt almost ironic. Because I hadn't broken it, he had. He chose to believe a narrative, a timestamp, a storyline over me. And in that moment, I understood something cold and uncomfortable. If he trusted a narrative more than he trusted my character, after 3 years together, then I was already alone in this relationship. I didn't beg. I didn't pull out receipts. I didn't try to prove timelines. I just looked at him and said that if he was this sure, there was nothing I could say. He looked slightly thrown off. Maybe he expected tears. Maybe he expected me to fight harder. But I was suddenly calm in a way. That even surprised me. He asked if I was just going to walk away, and I told him he already did. We left separately. No scene, no dramatic exit, just a quiet, almost sterile ending to something that was supposed to lead to forever. But the part that unsettled me didn't happen that night. It happened the next morning. I woke up to 3 messages from Chloe, Daniel's close friend. We hadn't spoken in weeks. She said she was sorry things ended like this. Ended like what? I thought. She asked how I was holding up. I stared at my phone, my chest tightening. Daniel and I hadn't told anyone yet. We hadn't posted anything. We hadn't even had time to process it ourselves. Yet somehow, Chloe already knew, and her tone didn't sound surprised. It sounded informed. That was the moment a new question formed in my mind. Daniel didn't just come to that rooftop with doubt. He came prepared, and someone had helped him believe I was guilty. The morning after that rooftop confrontation, I didn't react. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't post anything on social media. I just watched. Quietly, carefully. The world outside continued as always. People laughing, scrolling, moving through their routines, completely oblivious to the tension that had quietly settled over my life. I realized then that my first move wasn't a confrontation. It was patience, observation, and understanding. I started noticing patterns, subtle ones, the kind that only appear when you pay close attention. Daniel's jealousy wasn't random. It was methodical. Every comment, every hesitation, every carefully chosen word in conversation hinted at insecurities I hadn't fully recognized before. Chloe wasn't just a bystander. She had always been a strategist in the background, the kind who influenced people without being noticed. That realization hit me harder than the betrayal itself. I began keeping track. Not in a notebook, I didn't need to write it down yet, but in my mind. Every encounter, every casual social interaction, every dinner, every message, every glance, I cataloged them silently. Daniel always tried to interpret situations in ways that justified his conclusions. Chloe subtly nudged those interpretations, providing context, supplying evidence that made him trust his own narrative more than he trusted me. That was their pattern, and patterns I knew could be used. I practiced restraint. I didn't reply immediately when Chloe texted again. I didn't try to justify myself with Daniel. I let them underestimate me, let them assume I was hurt, confused, or worse, broken. They wanted a reaction, an emotional collapse, a dramatic fight. I gave them none. That silence was my first weapon. People always underestimate the quiet ones. At work, I started noticing the micro-manipulations Chloe performed, the way she phrased questions, the way she hinted at Daniel's suspicions in passing, the way she inserted herself into conversations just enough to redirect attention. Small gestures, small influences, but effective, and I learned. I observed not just what she did, but why she did it, what she gained and who noticed. Every move had consequences, even if subtle. I also looked at myself. I couldn't control them yet, but I could control me, my anger, my hurt, my need for validation. All of it became data. I transformed emotions into strategy. I realized that revenge wasn't about outshining them immediately. It was about control, clarity, timing, and that required patience more than fire, more than words, more than drama. Then came my first small test. Daniel called me late one evening, his voice calm, trying to sound casual. He asked how I was holding up. I smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. I told him I was fine, just busy life, I said. He paused. I could hear the calculation behind his next words. He was trying to gauge my emotional state, trying to predict my reaction. But he found nothing, just calm. I didn't tell him about the nights I spent replaying their betrayal. I didn't show him the growing fire beneath my composure. I simply let him wonder, and that uncertainty was more potent than confrontation. Over the next week, I began subtle manipulations of my own, small shifts in social dynamics. A word here, a compliment there, carefully phrased so that Chloe would notice, but not immediately interpret. A hint of self-confidence in conversations with mutual friends, enough to make her pause. I tested reactions. I saw who she relied on for validation. I noted who followed her lead blindly, and I cataloged it all silently. The most important part of this phase wasn't revenge. It was understanding leverage. Control wasn't loud. It was quiet, almost invisible. It was about planting seeds, observing growth, and knowing exactly when to act. With each observation, I could feel a part of my power returning, the part that had been diminished by shock and disbelief on that rooftop. And then I realized something that changed the way I viewed both of them. People reveal themselves not through what they say, but through what they assume. Daniel assumed I had betrayed him. Chloe assumed he would believe her. Their confidence in their own narrative gave them an edge, but it also created a vulnerability. I didn't have to fight them. I only had to move where they hadn't looked. By the end of that week, I wasn't broken anymore. I was alert, calculating, patient. The betrayal had been the catalyst, but now it was my playground. In that quiet observation, the first threads of my strategy began to take shape. Each micro-moment, each unspoken doubt, each subtle hesitation, they were all pieces in a game I was just beginning to master. By the second week, something had changed. Not around me, but within me. The shock had worn off. The sadness had settled into something colder and sharper. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. When mutual friends reached out with carefully neutral messages like, "Hey, I heard things got complicated," I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain about Mark. I didn't clarify timelines. I simply said, it didn't work out. That's all. And then I moved the conversation forward. That was my first strategic decision. Because when you rush to defend yourself, you validate the accusation. When you stay steady, you force people to question what they've been told. It started happening slowly. At a small get-together one Friday night, the first one, I agreed to attend post-breakup. The energy around me was cautious, curious, measuring. Chloe was there, polished, sympathetic, slightly too sympathetic. She hugged me a little longer than necessary. I hate that it ended like this, she said softly. I smiled. Not fake, not bitter, just calm. Yeah, it's unfortunate. No defense. No tension. No awkwardness. Later that evening, someone casually mentioned, "Oh, I didn't know he had a girlfriend." Another replied, "Yeah, they've been together for like 2 years." I didn't add anything. I didn't look at Chloe. I didn't react. But I felt it. Oh, damn. Because suddenly, the narrative Daniel had built had a crack in it, and cracks spread. Daniel texted me later that night. "Are you seeing anyone?" The question was almost desperate in its neutrality. I replied, "No, I've been busy." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't emotional either. He waited several minutes before responding. "I heard Mark has a girlfriend." "I know," I said. Another pause. "You never mentioned that. You never asked." That message sat between us like a mirror. For the first time since the rooftop, he didn't respond immediately. And I could feel something shifting, not dramatically, not explosively, but subtly. Doubt or realization. Instead of confronting Chloe, instead of starting a triangle of drama, I focused on my life in ways that were visible, but not performative. I accepted a leadership opportunity at work that required more public presentations. I updated my LinkedIn, not with breakup energy, but with progress. I started posting about projects, conferences, and panels. Not selfies. Not attention-seeking, stability. People noticed consistency. And Daniel noticed too. He began liking posts he had previously ignored, watching my stories within minutes. Small digital footprints that told a story he hadn't expected. He thought I would spiral. He thought the accusation would destabilize me. Instead, I stabilized. The most powerful moment didn't come from me proving anything. It came from him, realizing he had miscalculated. We ran into each other unexpectedly, at a mutual friend's birthday dinner about a month after the breakup. It wasn't dramatic, no cinematic music, just a crowded restaurant and an unavoidable table arrangement. When I walked in, he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not because I looked different, I didn't, but because my energy had shifted. I greeted him politely, sat across from him, held conversation easily with everyone at the table, laughed naturally. No tension. At one point, he leaned slightly toward me and said quietly, "You seem fine." I met his eyes and said, "I am." Confusion crossed his expression. Not anger, not pride. Only confusion, because the version of me he had prepared for, the guilty one, the defensive one, the regretful one didn't exist. Then he asked the question that confirmed everything. "Was there ever anything going on with Mark?" I didn't rush the answer. I didn't sound offended. "No," I said simply. "There wasn't." He studied my face, searching for cracks. There were none. Another oh damn moment, but this time it wasn't for me. It was for him. Because realization doesn't hit loudly. It settles slowly, like a weight pressing against your chest. I could see it settling, but I didn't press it. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say, "You ruined this." I let him sit with the possibility that he had ended a 3-year relationship over an assumption, over ego, over someone else's framing. And here's the most important part. I wasn't playing a game to get him back. I was shifting power by reclaiming my center. By the end of that night, something irreversible had happened. He was no longer sure. And when certainty cracks, pride follows. When Daniel texted asking if we could meet and talk properly, I already knew this wasn't going to be another argument. The tone was different. Less defensive, more uncertain. I agreed because I wanted clarity, not because I was desperate to fix anything. We met at a cafe near the park. It wasn't one of our usual places, and I think that helped. There were no memories sitting between us. When he sat down, he didn't start with small talk. He looked at me for a moment, and then said he needed to ask something directly. He asked if I had ever been emotionally involved with Mark in a way that crossed a line, even if it wasn't physical. I told him no. There was never anything romantic, never anything hidden, and never anything that disrespected our relationship. He held eye contact while I spoke, like he was trying to measure whether I was hesitating. When I finished, he asked why it always felt like he was competing with him. That question was more honest than any accusation he had made before. I asked him what exactly made it feel like competition. He said I talked about Mark often, that I seemed comfortable around him, and that from the outside it didn't always look neutral. He admitted that Chloe had pointed it out too, that she had said the dynamic looked emotionally close in a way that could blur boundaries. I asked him why he didn't just tell me, that he felt uncomfortable. He said he didn't want to sound insecure. He thought bringing it up would make him look weak or jealous. Instead, he started observing everything through suspicion. Small things felt bigger. Normal interactions started looking intentional. He said once the doubt settled in, it kept feeding itself. I reminded him that he never actually asked me to clarify anything. He never said, "This makes me uncomfortable." He never gave me a chance to explain what the friendship actually was. He admitted that he assumed if he had to ask, it already meant something was wrong. In his mind, needing reassurance felt like proof that the relationship wasn't solid. At one point, I asked him directly whether he thought I was capable of cheating. He hesitated before answering. He said he didn't think I was that type of person, but he was afraid of being the person who didn't see it coming. That fear mattered more to him than the reality of who I actually was. He would rather end things early than risk feeling blindsided later. That's when the real issue became clear. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't even Chloe's comments. It was Daniel's fear of vulnerability. He said walking away felt safer than staying and feeling unsure. I told him that ending a relationship because of insecurity doesn't protect you. It just shifts the damage somewhere else. He also admitted that after he found out, Mark had been in a committed relationship for years. The timeline didn't even support the suspicion he had built in his head. He realized he never verified anything. He reacted emotionally, and then justified it logically afterward. It felt heavy. Hearing him say that didn't feel satisfying. He asked me what I would have done if he had come to me earlier, and simply said he was feeling insecure. I told him I would have reassured him, but I also would have expected him to work on why normal friendships felt threatening. Reassurance can't fix deep insecurity. It can only calm it temporarily. By the end of the conversation, he wasn't defending himself anymore. He wasn't accusing me either. He was confronting the fact that he chose assumption over communication. He said he thought he was protecting himself from humiliation, but instead he created a situation where he lost something real. There was no dramatic apology and no emotional scene, just clarity. He finally understood that trust isn't only about loyalty. It's about how you handle doubt. And he hadn't handled it well. When we left the cafe, I realized something quietly but clearly. He had spent weeks questioning whether I was trustworthy. Now the real question was whether I could trust someone who lets insecurity make decisions for him. And that question didn't have an easy answer. After that conversation, life didn't explode with drama. It settled quietly, like the air after a storm. Daniel and I went our separate ways, not with anger, not with shouting, but with the understanding that some things couldn't be repaired overnight. I realized that trust isn't only about loyalty. It's about how someone handles doubt, how they face uncertainty without letting fear control their choices. I spent the following weeks reflecting, observing, and moving forward. I focused on my work, my friendships, and the things I loved, letting actions, not arguments, define me. Conversations with friends were lighter. Laughter returned naturally. I felt a calm I hadn't realized I'd missed. I didn't need to prove myself or justify my past to anyone. The clarity I had gained was enough. Whenever I thought about Daniel, it wasn't about resentment anymore. It was about understanding, about seeing that insecurity, when unaddressed, can destroy even the strongest connections. I forgave, not for him, but for myself, to reclaim the energy I had spent doubting, questioning, and worrying. I had taken back control of my emotions, my narrative, and my life. And the most satisfying part? I didn't have to fight to prove anything. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation, a public revelation, or revenge that burned bridges. The quiet strength I carried, the calm confidence I showed, it spoke louder than any words ever could. Life moved forward, and so did I. I met new people, explored new opportunities, built experiences that reminded me of my worth. I no longer measured myself by someone else's doubts or fears, and in that, I found freedom. Looking back, the lesson was simple but powerful. You can't control others' insecurities, but you can control how you respond. You can't force trust, but you can choose clarity, patience, and self-respect. You can't rewrite someone else's fear, but you can reclaim your own power. And as I walked away from that chapter, one thought stayed clear in my mind. The person who holds calm, clarity, and self-respect doesn't need to fight to be seen. They already own the story.